Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of Ask Dr. Jessica. I'm super excited. We have a phenomenal guest, Dr. Nina Shapiro. She is an ENT at UCLA, and she was also my attending when I was a resident, studying to be a pediatrician. Hi, Nina.
Hi, Jessica. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you here. I cannot wait to get into what you're here to talk about, which is the new book that you released. I have a copy right here. The
Yay.
Ultimate Kid's Guide to Being Super Healthy. I'm so excited to talk to you about your book. And you've also written another book recently, Hype.
Yes.
You're so impressive and prolific.
Thank you. So, book writing, I feel, is it's sort of especially for doctors. A lot of the book writing that we do is we really feel compelled to do it. So it's not like, oh, let me think of something to write a book about. This is more like, I need to do this. I need to say this and put it down to paper. So Hype was definitely that. That came out in 2018, and that was about medical myth busting. And there are more medical myths now, magnified than there were in 2018. But the basis is still the same. It's the hyperbole of how we're hearing things on social media, even in mainstream media, and how can healthcare workers as well as non-healthcare professionals decipher all of the nonsense that we're hearing on a minute to minute basis. So that was a really fun book that I felt like I needed to do. And then this new one, which is The Ultimate Kid's Guide to Being Super Healthy, was also something I felt that, especially around pandemic, kids were really getting the short shrift of all of the health information that we were incorporating and panicking about, and not really giving our kids the full story. And it made me think that, well, what about other things that are not pandemic related, that we're not necessarily telling our kids in a way that is understandable and usable for even elementary school kids. So this was a
That's
really fun one
amazing.
to do. Yeah.
That's amazing. It's so impressive that you're inspired and that you actually act on your inspiration and actually finish a book.
Thanks. Thanks.
So I know that Hype was written a few years ago, but I love this concept that you debunked medical myths because there are so many. Would you mind sharing maybe a couple of your favorite medical myths and that you debunked in your book?
Sure. So in Hype, some of the actually there was a whole section devoted to vaccines. This was before any COVID vaccine, any COVID infection was known. So,
Wow.
a lot of vaccine myths were out there, as many of us know, mostly related to children. So, the vaccines can cause the illness. That was sort of brought into COVID vaccines as well. That if you get a COVID vaccine, you're going to spread the COVID virus, and that you're going to get COVID. And that was a similar myth for all the other vaccines of childhood, that they were somehow harmful to the immune system in children. So a lot of these myths, are, evergreen. They continue into present day. And then there were other
Yes.
things like drinking water. You have to drink 8 glasses of water per day. No. So food that you eat has a lot of water in it. Almost all foods have water. So you don't need to drink 8 glasses of water per day. So that's a fun, easy myth that is easy to just say you don't have to do it.
That's a fantastic myth because so many people I talk to, they'll be on a diet and they feel like they have to drink 2 liters of water a day.
Yeah.
And you can even do harm if you drink too much water,
You can,
right?
you can. Something called, I mean, thankfully it's pretty rare, but something called hyponatremia, where your sodium goes dangerously low. That's
Right.
occasionally seen in athletes, actually, because they are rehydrating with plain water, and that's potentially pretty dangerous in
Like the
that
marathon
sense.
runners.
Exactly, exactly,
There's always a story of hyponatremia.
exactly. Careful.
That's a great myth. And any other ones? Or so vaccines, water.
I think,
I
some of the other ones that I think are, just general life things had to do with risk. I find risk very interesting. I'm a surgeon, so I
yes.
deal with risk benefits every day. Pretty much all of us in medicine are always sort of explaining the risks and benefits to patients about any sort of intervention. But I find that the way people interpret risk is very interesting, and, how to sort of reframe that.
Absolutely.
Risks of cancer, risks of, other sorts of injuries that people get. People sort of lose sight of the very basic, boring stuff we need to stay healthy and stay safe. Wear your seatbelt, don't smoke cigarettes, stay out of the sun. I'm bad about that. But, in general, I think I find that really interesting, that the way people sort of frame risk. So there are several chapters devoted to that as well.
I know after my husband read your book, he was inspired to go in the sun. And he usually, he's
Oh
from the East
no.
Coast, and he always thought sun was a bad thing. And after he read your book, I did notice that he was not as
Oh.
reluctant to be in the sun. So thank you,
Oh,
actually.
I don't know. I mean, that was sort of, that's my vice, I would say, where, I know that it's not that good for you. It's not good for you, but it's something that, it's hard for me to avoid. So,
Well, everything in moderation, right?
yeah,
You get the
exactly.
vitamin D benefits and the feel good.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So I think I happen to agree with you. I think a little sun is is good for the mental health.
Exactly.
Okay, so now to talk about the book that you just released. I think it is a brilliant concept because I think the way you are able to give information to parents and kids about medical topics, I think is so helpful because I find so many kids are always asking why, and your book really answers the why.
Thank you. Well, I try to, so the voice is written for children, but obviously there's a lot of information that I think a lot of adults may not know. And so I try to weave it in using child-friendly language, but, where the adults may be, reading it with their children or leaning over their child's shoulder or borrowing the book and say, let me learn about that as well. And I think that, we really need to arm our children with facts. It's really, really, we do it in our office all day. We don't even realize that we're doing it when we're explaining what we're doing to children, for children. But I think that, just on a daily basis, they deserve to know why they need to stay healthy, and what they need to do, and what those things are for them, how it's working for them, as opposed to just all of this stuff that we're telling them to do, which just seems to them to be orders.
I thought we could maybe go through some of the chapters so people listening can hear what kind of actionable advice that you're giving. So to start, I really like the chapter about eating healthy. Um, and I'll tell you, I even used some of your advice with my daughter yesterday.
Did it work?
It did work. Okay, so
Yay!
so I don't know if do you want to explain the premise of that chapter, and then I'll give my example.
Sure. So the chapter, which is called "Why Can't We Have Cookies for Dinner," was actually initially the working title of the book. And I wrote that chapter after rewatching the documentary Fed Up. And I don't know if you've seen it. I recommend it. It was many years ago that it came out. And the notion was really that a lot of the poor health that we're seeing in young children is due to what they're given at school and what they have at home as far as nutrition. So many schools in many parts of the country, 5 days a week in the cafeteria, will be literally a fast food chain. Will be so one day's McDonald's, one day's Pizza Hut, one day's Burger King, and for most kids, their eyes light up like that. I want to go to that school. That sounds like a great place to go. But in
Right.
this movie, they explain very simply, and it's a movie for adults. Here's what happens when you eat food. Here's the mechanism of digestion and nutrition and metabolism. Here it is. Here's how it works. Take it or leave it. And so I thought, why can't, if we can explain that to adults on a very basic level, why can't we explain that to a 7-year-old? And
Brilliant.
then they can understand. And, it's not good or bad, but this is what it is. Here's what happens when you eat bread. Here's what happens when you eat an orange. Here's what happens when you drink orange juice. And here's why these things are different. And here's what happens when you eat something that is high protein, high fiber, low carbohydrate, without saying, low carb or carbs are bad. I mean, that's crazy
Right.
to talk like that, especially to children. But just,
Right.
here are the different things that happen in your digestion. I mean, most kids, they like food if it tastes good. They don't like it if it doesn't taste good. They're, when their tummy is empty, they're hungry. And that's basically it. They know about peeing and pooping by the time they're 3 or 4 years old, but they don't really know what happens in between. And
It's a good point. Yeah, so I used your book yesterday with my daughter. We were going to gymnastics, and she asked if she could have a granola bar. And I had already made dinner. There was salmon and broccoli on the table and a sweet potato. And she asked for a granola bar. And I said, I said, why don't we first have dinner? And she said, why? I want this granola bar. And then I used your verbiage. I said, there's more fiber, more fiber in the broccoli, and
poor
there's more
daughter.
protein in the salmon. And I said, your digestion will be slower, and your body will have energy that lasts longer, and you'll be better at gymnastics. You'll have more
And
energy for the whole class. And she listened, and she didn't forget about the granola bar. She still asked for it afterwards, but she did. I could see that the information was soaking in, and she did have dinner first without fighting, which I think
great.
was a win. And I give your book the credit.
Happy to hear it. Or if you say, well, this granola bar is actually a cookie, which it really is, right?
Right.
Then you can say, so think of it as a cookie. And so when would you have a cookie? Would you have it before dinner, or would you have it after dinner? Would you have it instead of dinner? Um, so, but good job. Good job, Mom.
No, I think what's so helpful is, one thing I talk to parents so much at work about is frustration about children being picky eaters, and they're not eating the foods that parents want them to eat, and there's a battle over eating healthy foods. And what I like about explaining to kids, it's just so much better when they make the decision on their own.
Right.
If we're pushing them too much and you're battling at home, that doesn't feel good.
No, and that's really with everything, as we see.
Yes.
Going to sleep,
Yes.
and screens, everything. If they are part of the conversation and part of the process, it will make for a lot more peace in the household.
Can you explain how I love when you get into the sleep cycles and explaining why dreaming is important.
Yeah, so I think for the sleep, and also especially if you have more than one child, and obviously if they're different ages, and if they have 2 or 3 different bedtimes, there's probably a little bit, well, no fair. Why did they get to stay up later when we all wake up at the same time in the morning? How come I have to go to bed, before they go to bed? And so I really try to reframe it as like, I know, and the other thing I try to do for kids is that I know that you feel like it's doing nothing. I know that you feel like you're going to miss out on all the amazing stuff that all the older people are doing. So first to acknowledge that, and then to say, well, wait a second, let's talk about sleep, because it's not just doing nothing, missing out on everything, sort of being sequestered away from all the great stuff. To say, well, let's talk about what does go on during your sleep to see how amazing it is and all the great things that go on.
And can you tell me, so for people listening, if they're talking to their children about this, what good things do happen when we sleep?
So a lot of things happen when they sleep. One of the great things is that they get to dream. And most kids, by the time, they're certainly in elementary school, they can probably remember 1 or 2 dreams they've had, or maybe even more. And sometimes they're scary, or sometimes they're adventure, and sometimes they're just like these crazy, surreal things. But to explain that, it takes a few hours, or an hour and a half to 2 hours of several stages of sleep to get to that dream part. And that's the really important part. As cool as it is, it also is the time when your brain is resting, your brain is sort of forming memories, and your brain cells are growing. But you need to have that several times, ideally 5 times each night as a child, to get good growth of your brain and to get good memories to form. So that that needs to take place 5 times, and it's every 2 hours or so, that's about 10 hours of sleep. So that's a really cool thing that happens, but you can't just have all these dreams. If you go to bed really late and wake up really early, you're not going to get enough dreams that you really need to have your brain grow and be strong. And then all the other things about like your muscles and your heart and your lungs need to rest because you're really
Yes.
active during the day and you want to do good in sport, do well in sports and do well in school. And all those things need a little bit of a break, a little sort of reboot, recharge, just like charging your screen. You need to charge yourself to, I hate to use the screen analogy, but they can relate to that analogy. You need to sort of recharge yourself to have a good day the next day.
It's true. And I like you pointed this out, that there's benefits, tremendous benefits the next day. You're much less cranky. You're in a better mood. You have a better day. And that's the truth. I know for myself as an adult, it makes all the difference if you get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, and it's also, I think kids, then I always try to think, oh, how is your child going to push back? Well, okay, I'll go to bed early tomorrow, but tonight I want to stay up late. And I think just to sort of emphasize that it's not something you can catch up on. You can't just sort of get one really good night of sleep every week or two, and then just not take care of it the rest of the time. It has to be something that you do all the time.
Right. I like how you busted that myth in the book that there's no such thing as catching up on sleep.
Right. Unfortunately, I wish.
I also like, I say this to kids a lot, that your growth hormone is the highest when you're sleeping because a lot of kids are motivated to grow bigger. So if you get some sleep, you'll actually have, the highest amounts of growth hormone that will help you grow. That can be a motivator.
Sure. And then
that aspect.
They've said, people will say to them like, oh, did you grow overnight? And maybe they can say, yes, I did.
No, that's wonderful because sleep is something that I think all of us intuitively know is important, but it's so helpful to think about the why.
Right.
Now, as far as exercise, I think that's a great chapter as well because I really like the part where you mentioned that exercise should be enjoyable. I really like how you mentioned that exercise should be enjoyable and fun, and that it's not one size fits all for everybody.
Right. And I think, frankly, for most children, we don't have to tell them to exercise. They're natural movers. If anything, we need to tell them to sit still and, stop moving a little bit, which is great. But, I think especially, during pandemic and especially now that screens are really, dominating everything, even the most active kids are drawn to their screens. And so, we are battling, pulling them away and not asking them, but, hoping that they will, go outside or even exercise indoors if you live in an area where the weather is not great. But just to find something. And I think a lot of kids, depending on where they live or what their peer group is, they feel pressure that they have to be good at sports. This one is the best soccer player, this one is the best baseball player, tennis player down the line. And I think just to emphasize to kids that you don't have to really be good at any sport. You just have to find something that you like, and then you'll probably get much better at it. But not to feel that pressure of like, all my friends are, these great soccer players, and I'm just really not a natural soccer player, and frankly, I don't really like it. So find something else. There's so many sports that, or even sort of out of the box sports, there's fencing and there's karate and there are these other things that are great exercise, hiking, and certainly in places like Southern California that are great sports that are not necessarily sort of the standard what you think of that so many kids do.
It's so true. And I know you mentioned swimming in your book, which something that I enjoy doing. Yeah, there's so many ways to exercise and move your body. And I like that you point out that there's no best exercise.
There's no best exercise. And also speaking, I just want to mention for swimming, I do talk about this in the book as well, that I think that swimming is a necessary skill that all children should have, like it or not. I think it's a safety thing. So I give a little bit of
Absolutely.
a blurb about like, you got to learn to swim because, there's a lot of water in this world. And even if you
Yes.
don't have, if you don't live near a swimming pool or you don't live near an ocean, you will be exposed to water at some point. And just for safety, it's important to learn to swim. And then, most kids like it once they learn.
Personally, I ran cross country in high school because I wanted to do a sport and you didn't have to try out for cross country. They took everybody. And I'm not naturally athletic by any means. I think I was the worst or the second, I should say not the worst, the slowest or the second slowest on the JV team.
But you
But
always
to this,
finished.
I always finished. And I have to say, to this day, I still enjoy it. So, and I think that's, to me, I'm so glad that I participated and learned something and I improved from, for my capabilities. So even though I was never a scoring participant for any of the meets, it is something that I enjoy doing.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
great.
agree
You were
with that
part of the
advice.
team. Yeah, and you probably retained that skill that you can run as an adult and enjoy it. And so it's the same, just so you know, when your kids get older, cross country usually has no cuts.
That's good. So you don't have to be the best, just find something you like. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Now, and then you gave some really good actionable advice that I wanted to share with any listeners or touch on that I think would be really helpful. One was giving advice to parents to help children take medication. I thought that was really helpful. I know you had mentioned sweetening the medication,
Yeah, I mean
or what?
that so medicine, some kids it's no big deal, but for a lot of kids,
Right.
especially if they have to take antibiotics or medication, certain medications just absolutely taste terrible. And it's not just the taste, it's the consistency and it's the amount and it's the frequency. There's so many different problems with medications that kids don't like, and especially their liquids. So, the first part of the book, I'm talking about how sugar's not so great for you, and you metabolize it, and it kind of gives you this big burst of energy. And then here I am saying, like, take a tablespoon of sugar with with
It's
every
okay.
but a little bit. I think that I talk about the Mary Poppins thing about a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down, and that is a real thing. Spoiler, that was actually an oral polio vaccine that was given on a sugar cube, and that was the inspiration for that song.
Oh,
Fun fact. So, but sometimes if it's like used as a chaser, um, that sometimes will inspire a child. So, if you take this medicine, you can have this little sweet thing afterwards to kind of get the flavor away. So that's one thing to do. Another really cool thing that I heard about was to free, and this is probably for older kids, to freeze your taste buds. Just chew a little bit of ice chips or, put an ice cube on your tongue and that will kind of numb it. So then you can get the medicine down a little more quickly. There are a bunch of other little tricks, but, it's got to be done. Kids hate it, but, try
yeah.
to make it a little bit of a game or some fun. There was an ENT doctor who actually wrote a paper about M&M chasers for antibiotics, to give a child one or two M&Ms, not a bag of M&Ms, but just one or two after each dose of antibiotic, certainly harmless as well.
Absolutely. Some couple tricks I usually impart to parents. One is to take chocolate syrup. Chocolate syrup tends to hide the taste, and kids get excited
Mm-hmm.
about it. And the other trick I learned is to cover the spoonful of medication with some sprinkles.
Ooh,
And
that's
sometimes kids will
fun.
go for that.
That's fun.
Well, like sharing our tips,
Yeah,
because it can be really stressful for parents when kids refuse medication. So
it
that was
is.
great advice. Yeah.
And it's so easy for us to say as physicians, like, here's this prescription, take this 3 times a day for 10 days, maybe 14
Right.
days. I mean, that's just devastating for many families. So
It's true.
I feel for
No,
them.
I have my oldest child does not like taking medication, and it's a struggle. I
Yeah,
agree with you. It's easy advice to give, and then it's always harder
hard to do.
to
Yeah,
implement. Yes.
yeah.
And then I also like the advice that you gave about sleep. I think sleep is such a important topic for parents. I love how you talk about turning off the screens before bed and closing the kitchen. and reading books before bed. I know that works for me. Reading
Yeah,
books definitely puts,
yeah.
especially my children's books that I read to my kids, puts me right to sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these things, like I'm giving advice to children, but at the same time, I'm really giving advice to adults as well. We should all turn our screens off. We should not have our screens near our beds at all. Even charging, should be charged out of the bedroom. I think, no lights or, buzzes going off, unless we're on call, obviously, for work. Um, and midnight snacks, all that kind of stuff really applies to adults too, because we are chronically sleep deprived as adults, probably more so than kids.
Right. And I really appreciated the point you made that if we don't sleep well, our hunger hormones are off, and then we are more likely to eat when we're not hungry. And you know, that cycle can repeat itself, obviously, in ways that we don't want.
Right, right. We, as for those of us who remember being residents and being up all night, and then you just kind of eat to stay awake almost, and it just makes you feel, you get a little burst of energy and then you crash and you feel even worse. But your brain is kind of telling you one thing, and certainly on a regular basis it's pretty unhealthy.
It's so fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for talking about your book and coming on here. I really think it is a must read for parents. I really think not only will parents teach their children a lot about what is healthy, but I also think, honestly, as a parent, you'll learn a lot. Really,
Thank
really
you.
a wonderful resource. So thank you.